I had come into Dry Fork that morning with 11 head of gentled Mustang, and no intention of leaving with anything but the money they'd bring, and instead I left with a wife. A man my age ought to have learned by then that the Lord does his best work in the hours you've planned out tightest. But I hadn't, and so I stood at the loading pen arguing the price of a blood bay gelding when the noon train came in, and the whole shape of the rest of my life stepped down onto the platform in a gray traveling dress with the dust of 1,000 miles on the hem. I didn't see her at first. I heard the laugh. It was Harlan Voss's laugh, and there was no other like it in that town, loud, meant to be heard, the laugh of a man who has decided to be cruel and wants an audience for it. I'd known Voss the better part of 10 years and never once liked him. He owned the livery and a freight line and a piece of half the town's debts, and he wore a watch chain heavy enough to picket a horse, and he had a way of looking at a thing, a horse, a piece of land, a woman, like he was already pricing it for resale. So when I heard that laugh roll across the depot yard, I set down the gelding's lead and turned to see what Voss had found to be cruel about. He'd found a woman. She stood beside a single-corded trunk with her hands folded in front of her, and she was looking at Voss the way you'd look at weather coming steady, taking its measure, not flinching from it. She was tall and plain-faced in the way the word plain gets used by men who have never had to be brave about anything, which is to say she had a strong jaw and a wide, clear brow and gray eyes set level, and her brown hair was pinned up under a bonnet that had seen the whole journey. She was no girl. 30 if she was a day, and carrying it like a woman who'd earned every year and didn't intend to apologize for them. I sent for a bride, Voss was saying loud to the dozen folks the train had drawn to the platform. I paid passage for a bride, and the agency in St. Louis sends me this. He swept a hand at her like he was showing off a lame mule. Look at her, old enough to be my maiden aunt and plain as a fence post. I'll not take her. I'll not pay another nickel toward her. Let her go back where she came from, or let her go to the devil, it's all one to me. There's a particular quiet that falls on a crowd when a man does a thing that low. It isn't shock, exactly. It's people deciding, all at once and all silently, that they'd rather not be seen to disagree with the man who holds their paper. Mrs. Prout from the dry goods looked at her shoes. The station master found something to do with the mail sack. And the woman stood there in the middle of all that silence with the sun beating down on her, 1,000 miles from wherever she'd started, with one trunk and no kin and no claim on a soul in that town, and she did not weep, and she did not beg. She said, "Then I'll thank you to give me back my letter, Mr. Voss, so I can show the agency in St. Louis exactly what you wrote and what you promised, and let them judge between us." That set Voss back a half step. He hadn't expected her to have teeth. Cruel men rarely do. They pick their marks for softness, and it rattles them when they've misjudged. "Letter," he said. "What letter?" "The one in your hand," she said, "that you've been waving like a flag. I'd wager it's the very one where you wrote that you were a Christian man of good standing and modest means, looking for a helpmeet of sober habits and a sound constitution. I have a sound constitution, Mr. Voss. I never claimed to be a beauty. You never asked for one. You asked for a worker and a wife, and I came near 2,000 miles to be both, in good faith, and you'll not turn it into a joke to save the price of my passage." "By God," somebody muttered behind me, and I think it was admiration. But Voss had his audience and his pride, and a man like that will spend any amount of meanness to keep from looking the fool. He balled the letter and threw it in the dust at her feet. "There's your letter," he said. "And there's the road, and there's the train back come tomorrow noon, and you can sleep in the depot tonight for all of me. I owe you nothing. I'll tell anyone who asks I owe you nothing." And he turned on his heel and walked off toward the livery, and his 2-yard men trailed after him grinning, and the crowd began to come apart the way a crowd does, in 2s and 3s, talking low, not one of them stepping toward her. I have asked myself many times since what made me cross that platform. I was a man who'd spent 15 years learning how to want nothing. My Sarah had been 3 years in the ground out on the mesa, and I'd built my whole life around the size of that absence, the way you'll build a fence around a sinkhole, not to keep anything out, just to mark where the ground gives way. I broke horses and I sold horses, and I went home to a cabin with one chair pulled up to the stove, and that had been enough, or close enough, or I had told myself so often enough that it amounted to the same thing. But I had watched her bend down, calm as Sunday, and pick that crumpled letter up out of the dirt and smooth it flat against her skirt, and fold it careful and put it away inside her glove like a thing of value, like evidence, like she meant to live long enough to be proved right. And something in me that I'd thought was good and dead turned over in its sleep. I picked up her trunk. It was heavier than it looked, the way a woman's whole life is, and I shouldered it and I said, "Ma'am, I've no wish to add myself to a long day's worth of men telling you what to do. So I'll only say this once, and you may answer how you like. I run a horse outfit 2 hours west, out on Ladder Mesa. I lost my wife some years back and I've kept it alone since, and it's gotten ahead of me. I need a cook and a keeper of the house and somebody who isn't afraid of work, and I'll pay an honest wage and you'll have your own room with a bolt on the door and my word, which is good in this town whatever else they'll tell you, that I'll never come knocking at it. That's all it is. A job. You can take the train tomorrow and I'll think no less of you. But you needn't sleep in a depot tonight, and you needn't go back to St. Louis to be laughed at twice." She looked at me a long moment. I was aware of how I must look to her, a rangy, sun-cured, gray-shot man near 40 with horse on his clothes and not a soft thing about him. And I was aware, too, of every soul still loitering on that platform straining to hear, and of the great careful stillness of her, like a horse deciding whether the hand held out to it meant a halter or a strike. "What's your name?" she said. "Ezra Doane." "They speak well of you, Mr. Doane, truly." "You'll have to ask them. I'd not trust a man's account of himself, and I won't ask you to trust mine. Ask the parson. Ask Mrs. Prout yonder, who's pretending not to listen. I'll wait." The ghost of something moved at the corner of her mouth, not a smile. She had too hard a morning for a smile, but the place a smile would someday come from. She turned and asked Mrs. Prout, plain and direct, "Is he a decent man?" And Mrs. Prout caught, went red, and allowed that Ezra Doane was as decent as they came, and kept to himself and paid cash and had buried a good wife and never been known to lie or raise his hand, which was about the longest speech I'd ever heard the woman make. "Cora Farrell," she said then, turning back to me, and put out her hand to shake like a man would, firm, dry, calloused across the palm in a way that told me she'd known work before this and a good deal of it. "I'll take the job, Mr. Doane. I'll take it on trial a month, and if it doesn't suit either of us we'll part square and you'll dock my wage for what passage you stake me. I won't be charity. I've never been charity in my life, and I won't start at 30. "Wouldn't insult you by offering it," I said. That was the whole of it. No vows, no parson, no ring. Just a heavy trunk and a hard handshake, and the two of us walking off that platform toward my wagon while the town watched. And behind us I could feel Dry Fork already starting to tell the story its own way, the way towns do. By suppertime the tale going around, I learned this later, was that Voss had turned away a homely mail-order bride, and Ezra Doane had up and taken her out to the mesa, and folks could make of that whatever sin they liked. I didn't much care. I'd stopped caring what Dry Fork thought of me about the same time I'd stopped caring about most things. What I didn't know yet was that the woman beside me on that wagon seat, sitting straight-backed with her hands folded and the red mesas swinging up slow on the horizon, was about to make me care about a great many things again, whether I'd planned on it or not. And I hadn't planned on it. I want that understood. I was not a man looking to be saved. I had made my peace with the size of my life. She came along and showed me my life had been a stall I'd been standing in with the gate open the whole time, and I just never thought to walk out. But that came later. That first afternoon we hardly spoke. The wagon creaked, the mules leaned into the long grade up onto the mesa, the heat came off the red rock in waves you could see, and somewhere about an hour out she said, looking at the country, "It's hard land." "It is." "Good," she said it firm, like the matter was settled. "I've had enough of the soft kind. Soft land grows soft men. I'd sooner know where I stand. I have thought about that sentence more than any other she ever spoke, and she spoke a great many to me over the years, some of them sharper. But that one, that first afternoon, I'd sooner know where I stand, that was the whole of Cora Farrell, laid down plain on the wagon seat between us before I'd known her 4 hours. She'd sooner know where she stood, and she'd sooner stand on hard ground and hold it than be given soft ground as a favor. The ranch on Ladder Mesa wasn't much to look at, and I'd have been the first to say so. A long, low cabin of squared logs and adobe chinking, a good stone well, a barn I'd built sound, 3-pole corrals, a tack shed, and behind it all the broken red country running up to the rimrock where I ran my horses on what graze and water the mesa allowed. It was a hard outfit and a lonely one, and it had been getting away from me. Sarah had kept the house a bright, clean thing. In 3 years I'd let it go gray. There was a winter's worth of harness needed mending hung on pegs I hadn't touched. The garden she'd loved had gone back to weeds and lizards. I'd been living in the barn, mostly, in everything but the sleeping. Cora stood in the yard that first evening with her trunk at her feet and looked the place over slow, the cabin and the barn and the corrals and the long red reach of the mesa beyond, and I braced for what I figured was coming, which was a woman's dismay. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves. "Show me the kitchen," she said, "and the woodpile, and where you keep the lye and the rags, and then leave me to it. A man hovering is no use to anybody." By the 3rd day, the cabin smelled of soap and bread instead of dust and old smoke. By the end of the 1st week, she dragged Sarah's garden back from the dead. I'd not had the heart, and she had the heart for anything, and had beans and squash coming up in straight hoed rows, and had mended that winter's harness better than I'd have done it, her needle through the leather quick and sure. She rose before me, which I'd have sworn was impossible, and she went a bed after, and in between she did the work of 2 and never once asked for thanks or seemed to expect it. She kept her own room with the bolt on the door, and I kept my word and slept in the barn the 1st weeks, and then in the lean-to room off the tack shed when the nights cooled, and we were as formal with each other as a banker and a parson, and I told myself I was content. But I'd watch her stand at the corral fence of an evening, after the work was done, looking at the horses. I ran a rough string in those days. Mustangs I'd buy green off the open range or off the Mexican traders, gentle out, and sell broke to ranches and the freight lines and now and again the army. It's a particular kind of work, and not every man has the hands for it, and almost no women I'd ever met had the interest. Cora would stand at that fence in the long red light watching a colt move, and I'd see her reading it, the set of an ear, the lift of a foot, the place a horse was scared and the place it was only stubborn, and one evening she said, not turning around, "That sorrel filly's not mean. She's frightened of her own near side. Somebody hit her there, hard, more than once, and young. You're working her right side and she's quiet as milk, and you turn to the left and she comes apart, and you keep treating it like temper. It's not temper, it's memory." I'd been 3 weeks failing to make sense of that filly. "You've handled horses," I said. "My father trained them, saddle stock in Missouri, before the bank took the place and before he drank himself under it." She said this the way she said everything, flat and without self-pity, a fact laid on the table. I was the only child and no son, so I was the help. I was gentling 2-year-olds at 12. "I can sit anything you've got in that corral, Mr. Doane, and I can read it better than you can. And you've been wasting me on bread and beans, because it never crossed your mind a plain woman of 30 knows the front of a horse from the back. I won't pretend that didn't sting, because it was true." "Show me then," I said, "the filly in the morning." In the morning she went into that corral in a split skirt. She'd sewn herself out of an old wool blanket, and she worked that frightened sorrel filly for the better part of 2 hours, and she did it from the off side, the bad side, the memory side, slow, talking low, her hand always coming from below where the filly could see it, and never from above where a blow would come. And by the time the sun was full up, She had a leg over that filly bareback and was sitting her quiet in the middle of the pen, while the filly blew and licked and dropped her head and let go of a fear she'd carried since she was a baby. And Cora looked across the rails at me with the first true smile I ever saw out of her, sweat on her face and dust to the elbow, and she said, "There." She just needed somebody to come at her from the side that was broke. I have heard preachers go on about grace by the hour and never say it half so plain. Come at the broke side gentle. Come from where they can see your hand. That was Cora Farrell's whole gospel, and she lived every word of it, on horses and on people both, on me most of all, though I was slower to gentle than the filly and gave her a deal more trouble. After that I quit wasting her. We worked the string together, and it doubled what I could do, and the horses came along quicker and quieter and sold for more, and the talk in Dry Fork shifted from the scandal of the plain bride to the curiosity of the woman out at Doan's who could ride anything on 4 legs. I'd take a string in to sell, and men who'd watched Voss laugh at her on the platform would sidle up and ask was it true Doan had a woman could break a horse, and I'd say it was, and I'd watch it cost Voss something every time, because Voss had thrown away a thing the minute he decided it had no value, and now everyone could see it had been worth a great deal, and a man like Voss can't abide being proved a poor judge. So he commenced to make trouble. I should have seen it coming. A small, cruel man who's been shown up will not let it lie. The trouble started, as trouble in dry country always does, over water. My Mesa Grays depended on a string of springs along the rimrock, and a fair flow down a draw called Antelope Wash that fed the only stock tank worth the name for 10 miles. I held the deeded ground around the springs and I held it square, but the wash ran down off public range, and Voss, who'd been buying up Dry Fork's debts for years the way a buzzard works a herd, patient, waiting for the weak ones to go down, had got himself title to a piece of the upper range that summer, and that fall he sent his yard men to throw a wire and brush dam across Antelope Wash above my line. It was legal near enough, and it was meant to break me. Cut off the wash and my stock tank dried inside a month, and I'd have to drive my horses 20 miles to water or sell them off cheap, and either way I'd be hurt. And a hurt man on a hard outfit is a man who will sell low when the offer comes, and the offer would come, and it would come from Voss, and it would be just enough to clear my debts and not a dollar more. And he'd have the mesa and the springs, and the satisfaction of having ground Ezra Doan and his plain woman into the dirt where he reckoned we belonged. I knew all this the morning I rode up the wash and found the dam. I sat my horse and looked at it a long while, and I felt the old gray flatness coming up in me, the 15 years habit of wanting nothing, of grief, of letting a thing go because fighting for it meant admitting you cared whether you kept it, and I rode home half decided to take whatever Voss offered and quit the country. Cora was in the corral. She read it off me before I was out of the saddle. "What's wrong?" I told her. I told her flat, the way she'd taught me, the dam and the water and the squeeze and the offer that was coming, and I told her, too, the thing underneath it, because she'd earned that much from me by then, that I'd half a mind to sell and go, that the place had gone bitter in my mouth since Sarah. That maybe a man got tired of holding ground. She heard me all the way out. She had a great gift for that, hearing a thing all the way out before she answered it. Then she set down the brush she'd been using, and she came and stood at my stirrup, and she looked up at me, and her gray eyes were level and hard as I'd ever seen them. "Ezra Doan," she said, and it was the first time she'd used my given name, and it landed on me like a hand on the chest. I came 2,000 miles to a man who turned me out in the dirt in front of a crowd, and I picked up his hateful letter and I folded it up and I kept it, because I'll be damned before I let a small, cruel man write the end of my story for me. I've been turned out and laughed at and counted for nothing my whole life by men exactly like Harlan Voss, and I learned a thing about them young, and the thing is this: they do not win because they are strong. They win because everyone they push decides it's easier to fall down than to keep standing up. That's all. That's the whole trick of them. They hit you and they hit you, and they are betting their entire worthless lives that you will get tired of standing before they get tired of hitting. And most folks do. Most folks get tired. I never have. I don't intend to start at 30 over a brush dam in a wash. You want to know whether a man gets tired of holding ground. I'll tell you the answer. Only if he forgets there's something on the ground worth holding. And she put her calloused hand over mine where it rested on the saddle horn, the first time she'd touched me since the handshake on the platform, and she said, quieter, "There's something on this ground worth holding. I've made it so. I dug that garden back out of the dead. I broke that filly off her broke side. I've got bread rising in your kitchen and beans I planted with my own 2 hands and a room with a bolt I've quit needing to throw. This is the first place in my whole life that's been mine to hold. I will not let Harlan Voss take it because you got tired. So you can sell if you want to. But you'll sell it out from under a woman who's not done fighting for it, and you'll have to look me in the eye to do it." I did not sell. I want to set that down plain, because it's the hinge of the whole thing, the place my life turned. A man can spend years deciding he wants nothing, and it can take exactly one woman with her hand on his and bread rising in his dead wife's kitchen to show him he'd been lying to himself the whole time. I'd not been a man who wanted nothing. I'd been a man so afraid of wanting again that I'd called it peace. Cora named it for what it was, standing at my stirrup in the dust, and once a thing's named you can't unname it. "All right," I said, my voice came out rough. "All right, Cora, we'll hold it." "We will," she said, like it was already done. We fought Voss the way she'd taught me to gentle a horse, from the side that was broke, where he couldn't see our hand coming. I'd have ridden up that wash with a rifle and torn his dam out and got myself killed or jailed for my trouble, which was exactly what Voss wanted. A dead or jailed Ezra Doan was a sold ranch. Cora wouldn't have it. "You don't beat a man like that with your fists," she said. "He's got more fists than you, yard men, money, the sheriff half in his pocket. You beat him with his own kind of weapon, paper, patience, the truth in front of enough people that he can't laugh it away." She'd kept that crumpled letter in her glove for a reason I came to understand. Cora believed, with a faith that had been beaten into her and never beaten out, that the truth told plain in front of witnesses was the strongest thing in the world, stronger than money, stronger than meanness, if you could only get folks to stand still and look at it. So first we saw to the water ourselves, with our own hands, and didn't wait on any man. There were old springs up under the rimrock on my own deeded ground that Sarah and I had never had the labor to develop. Cora and I spent 3 weeks of brutal work. I'll not pretend it was anything else. Digging out 2 of those springs, walling them with dry-laid stone, and trenching the flow down to a new stone tank we built ourselves below the rim, all of it on ground that was mine free and clear where Voss couldn't touch a drop of it. She worked beside me every hour of it, blistered and burned and never once complaining, lifting stone a good many men would have balked at, and at the end of 3 weeks we had water of our own that no brush dam in Antelope Wash could ever choke off again. Voss could keep his dam. We didn't need the wash. That was the first thing. We made ourselves not need the thing he was using to break us, and a small, cruel man with nothing to squeeze has nothing. But Cora wasn't satisfied with merely surviving him. "A man who tried to break you once will try again," she said, "and the next person he tries it on may not have springs of their own to dig. He's been doing this to Dry Fork for years, the debts and the squeeze and the buying low off folks he's ruined. The town's afraid of him because the town owes him, and nobody's ever once stood up in the open and named what he is. Somebody has to be the first to stand up. After that it gets easier for everyone." The chance came at the fall horse sale. The fall sale was the biggest day of the year in Dry Fork, ranchers and traders and the freight men and the Army remount officer all in town, the corrals full, money moving. I'd brought in a string of 15 head, the best I'd ever offered, half of them gentled by Cora's hand, and they were the talk of the pens. And Voss, who'd watched all summer as the woman he'd thrown away made me prosper, came to the sale carrying a grudge he'd been feeding for months, and he'd brought a horse of his own. He'd brought a black stallion called Lucifer, and there's no kindness in what had been done to that horse. He was a big, beautiful, ruined animal. Voss had bought him cheap because he was a man-killer, had thrown one breaker through a fence and crippled another, and Voss kept him because a vicious horse suited Voss's notion of himself, and because he liked to bet money no man could ride him and collect when none could. He'd brought Lucifer to the fall sale to make a wager and to make a point. And the point, when he stood up on the auction block to make it, was Cora. "I hear," Voss said loud, to the whole crowded sale yard with that laugh starting up in his voice, "that Ezra Doan's got himself a wonder out on the mesa. A woman can break any horse alive, they say. The plain one I had the good sense to send back." Laughter, some of it, the nervous kind. "Well, I've got a horse here no man in this territory has stayed on. I'll put up $500 in gold, 500, gentlemen, that Doan's wonder can't ride my Lucifer to a standstill." $500, or has the wonder got more mouth than seat? It was a cruel trick and a clever one. If I said no, he'd crowed it all over the territory that the woman was a fraud and Doan a fool, and the Worth folks had started to see in Cora would curdle back to a joke. If I said yes, he meant for that horse to break her, to throw her, hurt her, maybe worse, in front of the whole town. So the last picture anyone in Dry Fork ever carried of Cora Farrell was of her in the dirt of the auction yard with Voss laughing over her. He'd built the whole thing to win either way. That's how those men work. They build the trap so both doors shut on you. I was already on my feet to refuse it loud, to call Voss the coward he was, because I'd sooner have eaten the loss of every dollar in that yard than see her in danger, when Cora's hand closed on my arm. "No," she said low just to me. "Sit down, Ezra. Cora, that horse is a killer. He's not asking you to ride a horse, he's asking you to. I know exactly what he's asking. He's betting I'll get tired before he does." Her gray eyes were steady on the black stud where they had him snubbed up short and fighting at the rail, and I watched her read him the way she read every horse, the ears, the eye, the way he struck, and I watched something settle in her face that was past fear on the other side of it. "Look at him, Ezra. Look at his offside. They've scarred it raw. Somebody beat that horse near to death on the left, the same as your sorrel filly, only worse for years. He's not a killer. He's the most frightened animal I've ever seen, and he's been hit so long he hits first now. I can come at him from the broke side. I'm the only one here who can because I'm the only one who's bothered to look." She stood up. "And I'm going to do it in front of this entire town, and when that horse drops his head and goes quiet under my hand, every soul in Dry Fork is going to understand at one time exactly what Harlan Voss is, a man who looks at a frightened thing and sees only something to beat or sell. Let me up, Ezra. This is the fight. This is the one worth holding the ground for." I have never in my life been so afraid as I was watching Cora Farrell climb up onto the auction rail, and I have never been so certain I was looking at the bravest soul God ever made, and that I would be a coward forever if I dragged her down off that rail to keep her safe, because she had not asked me to keep her safe. She'd asked me to trust her. Coming at the broke side, gentle, your hand where they can see it. She had taught me her whole gospel all summer, and now she was asking me to live it, to stand back and let her be exactly as strong as she was. So I stood back. The yard went dead quiet. Voss was grinning like he'd already won. And Cora went over the rail into the pen with that man-killing black stud, and she did not go at him fast or loud the way the breakers before her had, the way Voss expected, the way that had got men crippled. She went slow. She went to his offside, his broke side, the scarred side, her empty hand held low where he could see it, and she began to talk to him, low, steady, no words you could make out, just that river of low sound she used on the frightened ones, and that great black devil of a horse that had thrown grown men through fences stood there sweated and shaking and rolling his eye at her, and struck at her once, and she swayed back from it easy as a reed, and never raised her voice and never raised her hand, and came on again from the side he was broke, where he could see her low. It took an hour. I will not stretch it. It took the better part of an hour, and it was the longest hour of my life, and there were moments my heart stopped entire. But she never hurried, and she never quit, and she never once met that horse's fear with anything but more patience than it had hurt, which is the only thing in this world that has ever beaten fear. And the crowd that had come to see a woman thrown stood there instead and watched, hushed, while a plain woman of 30 outlasted the meanness that had been beaten into a horse over years. Wore it down not by being stronger than it, but by refusing, hour on hour, gentle and unhurried. To be tired of standing before it was tired of hitting. And the horse broke. Not the way Voss meant. He broke the way a fever breaks. All at once that black stud's head came down and his ear came round and the breath went out of him in a long shudder, and he licked and chewed and stepped toward her hand, toward it, of his own will, the killer horse, and put his big scarred head against Cora Farrell's chest and stood there trembling, and let her be the first soft thing that had ever touched his off side. And she stood holding that horse's head against her, both her arms up around it, with the dust and sweat on her and the late sun coming gold across the sale yard. And she was, I'll say it the way I felt it and let it stand. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life or ever will, and there wasn't a man in that yard fool enough any more to call her plain. Then she swung up onto his bare back, that horse no man had stayed on, and she rode him quiet around the pen once, twice, a slow, easy circle with her hand resting flat on his neck, and the sale yard came apart all at once in a roar, every rancher and trader and freight man on his feet, hats off, hollering, and it was the Army remount officer, a captain down from the fort, who climbed up on the rail and called out over all of it, "I'll give you $400 for that horse this minute. Broke like that, ma'am, and I'll give you 40 more head to break at $50 the head, and consider it the best money the United States Army ever spent." Cora rode that black stud over to the rail where Voss stood with his 500 in gold he now owed, and the grin gone off his face like water off slate, the whole town watching, and she said to him, not loud, but in that dead quiet yard everyone heard every word, "You said you'd not pay a nickel toward me, Mr. Voss. I'll take the 500 you wagered, since you're so free with your gold today. And I'll tell these good people what it is you do, since I appear to be the first one in this town with no debt to you and nothing left to fear from you. You buy folks' troubles cheap, and you wait for them to go down, and then you take what they've got. And you've done it to half the people standing here, and the only reason you've gotten away with it is that not one of them ever believed they could outlast you. Well, they've just watched a woman you called worthless outlast the meanest horse in the territory. So I expect the believing's about to come easier all around. Good day to you." And she rode away from him through a town that was cheering her, and Harlan Voss stood in the dust counting out $500 in gold into my hand with his jaw working, and not a word he could say. Because there is nothing on God's earth a small, cruel man can do against the truth told plain in front of enough witnesses. Cora had been right about that her whole hard life, and she had just proved it in front of everyone who'd ever doubted her. He left the country before the spring. Once folks stopped being afraid of him, and they stopped all at once, the way she'd said they would, the first stander-up making it easy for the rest. His debts and his squeezes and his meanness had nothing to grip, and a man like that can't live anywhere he isn't feared. The Brush Dam and Antelope Wash rotted and washed out in the first big rain, and we never did need it, having our own springs by then. But I'm getting ahead of the part that matters. The part that matters happened that same evening, on the long wagon road home from the fall sale, with $500 of Voss's gold in the box and a contract from the Army in my coat and the new black stud. She'd named him Job, for the patience it took, and made me sell him to no one, tied on behind, gentle as a lamb at the tailgate. We rode a long way in the dark, not talking, the way we'd ridden out that first day, only it wasn't the same silence at all. The first one had been two strangers. This one was full of everything neither of us had said all summer. Finally, I pulled the mules up on the rim where you could see the whole mesa laid out under the stars and the one lit window of the cabin far off. The window she'd put a light in before we left so we'd have something to come home to. And I made myself say it. And I am not a man to whom words come easy. Cora, I've a thing to say and I'll likely say it badly. I turned the reins over in my hands. When you came, I told you it was a job, a room with a bolt and an honest wage, and I'd never come knocking. And I meant it, and I'd mean it still tonight if that's all you wanted it to be. You came here free and you'll stay free, and you can take your half of that gold yonder and your name on this army contract, for it's as much your work as mine, more, and set up your own outfit anywhere in the territory you please, and you'd not want for buyers, not after today. I'd not hold you. I'd never hold any creature that wanted to go. You taught me that on the horses, though I expect you meant me to learn it on myself. Ezra. Let me get it out. I'm slow, but I'll get it out. I looked at her in the starlight. That strong, clear face I'd had the gall to think plain the first hour, and had not been able to think anything but lovely for months. I buried my heart with Sarah, and I told myself for 3 years that was peace, and you came along and showed me it was just a man too scared to want anything again, hiding in a stall with the gate open. You dug my dead wife's garden back to life, and you didn't ask if you could. You just saw a thing worth saving and you saved it. And I think, Cora, I think you've gone and done the same to me, the same exact way, from the broke side, gentle, where I could see your hand coming, and I quit being able to lie to myself about it somewhere back around the time you put your hand on mine at my stirrup and told me there was something on this ground worth holding. She had gone very still. I made myself finish. I'm not asking you to be a hired woman. I never want to hear the word wage between us again. I'm asking you to be my wife, true, before the parson, your name beside mine on the deed to this place, equal, an owner and not a keeper. And I'm asking it knowing I've nothing to recommend me but a hard outfit and a slow tongue and a heart that took 15 years and a brush dam and a killer horse to come back to life. You can say no. You'll be no worse off than you were this morning, and a deal richer. But I had to ask you on the rim with the whole place in front of us. So you'd know I meant the place too, half of it, free and clear in your name before ever you said yes or no. Not as a bargain. So there'd be no bargain in it at all. So it'd be a free thing both ways, the way you'd sooner know where you stand. For a long moment she didn't say anything, and my heart went down into my boots. Then Cora Farrell reached inside her glove, that same glove she'd kept Voss's hateful letter in all those months, the evidence she'd folded up so careful that first day, like a woman who meant to live long enough to be proved right. And she drew the letter out, and she looked at it once in the starlight, and then she leaned out over the side of the wagon and let the wind off the mesa take it, and we watched it go pale and small into the dark. I don't need it anymore, she said. I've been proved right. And then she turned to me with that smile I'd first seen on her over the back of a frightened filly, the true one, the one that started somewhere deep and came up slow. Yes, Ezra Doan. Before the parson, my name on the deed, equal an owner. Yes. I came 2,000 miles meaning to be a wife and a worker in good faith, and a small, cruel man tried to make a joke of it on a train platform, and I folded up his joke and kept it and rode out here and made it the truest thing in my life instead. I'll have you. I've wanted to have you since about the 3rd week, when you quit hovering and let me at the harness, though it took you till the rim to catch up, slow as you are. She laughed. I'd hardly heard her laugh before that night, and it was a fine, plain, honest sound. Put your name on the deed beside mine and let's go home. There's a light in the window. I lit it for us. I married her that next Sunday in Dry Fork, in the little church, and the same town that had stood silent while Voss threw her letter in the dust now filled the pews and spilled out the door, because there is nothing folks love better than a woman who outlasted the man who counted her for nothing. And Mrs. Prout cried, and the army captain stood up as a witness, and the parson said the old words, and Cora answered them in that level voice and put her hard, warm, capable hand in mine. And I have held it now for going on 20 years. We built that hard outfit on Ladder Mesa into the best horse ranch in the territory, the two of us, equal, her name first on the deed because I insisted on it, and she let me have my way that once. The army bought our broke stock by the 100 head over the years. We dug out every spring under that rimrock and never wanted for water again. We raised 3 children on the mesa, 2 boys and a girl, and the girl can sit anything on 4 legs and reads a horse better than either of us, which Cora says is only right, and we buried none of them, which on hard land is a mercy you give thanks for on your knees. The black stud Job lived to be 28 and died in the pasture in his sleep, the gentlest horse we ever owned, and we never sold him. I am an old man now, and Cora's hair has gone gray as mine, and her face that the whole town once called plain is the only face I have ever wanted to wake up to or will, and these long evenings we still go out and stand at the corral fence together in the red light and watch the horses move, the way we did that first summer before either of us would say what we were to each other. And sometimes, standing there, I think about that morning on the depot platform, the laugh, the silence, the letter in the dust, a plain tall woman with nowhere on earth to go, picking it up and folding it careful and putting it away because she'd be damned before she'd let a cruel man write the end of her story. She wrote the end herself. She wrote all of it herself with her own 2 hard hands, out of nothing but grit and patience and a refusal to be tired of standing before the world got tired of hitting. I just had the good sense, one noon in Dry Fork, to pick up her trunk, and the better luck after that she let me come at her from the side I was broke, gentle where I could see her hand, and gentled me too. Folks ask me sometimes, the young ones, how a man knows the one worth holding the ground for. I tell them what she told me at my stirrup, the truest thing I know. You don't get tired of holding ground, only of forgetting there's something on it worth the holding. There is, her name's first on the deed.